some, this may seem like an ordinary website alert. To others, you may understand what it means. Regardless, in this video I will explain how dangerous this simple pop-up could be. This is cross-site scripting explained. The term cross-site scripting, or XSS, could be something you're already very familiar with. And in that case, feel free to skip further ahead in the video. I'll include timestamps, so it should be pretty easy to find your way around. However, if this is brand new to you, or you just want to touch up on your skills a little, feel free to stick around. So before the video starts, I would just like to say that this is completely educational. I absolutely do not condone anyone trying to hack into websites for real. That would probably land you in a little bit of hot water. However, if you do want to practice your cross-site scripting skills, I'll leave a link in the description to a few test environments where you are actually allowed to go and practice these skills. So before we start the video, if we want to understand more about XSS, we need to understand a little bit about how websites work. In the early days of the web pages were completely static. They had no possibility to be dynamic and look sort of like this. Not great, right? To combat this limitation, in 1995 and 96 respectively, JavaScript and CSS were created to add interactivity and unique designs to websites to make them look and feel significantly better. Now, as great as this was for end users, HTML wasn't initially designed to support these features, and for this reason, a whole load of vulnerabilities came as a result of the implementation of, well, basically anything that was added to websites post-HTML. So in a nutshell, cross-site scripting utilizes a lot of the vulnerabilities that were created when JavaScript was implemented into mainstream web pages. Most XSS attacks involve injecting your own code, also known as payloads, into websites to gain access to secure information such as cookies and session information. So we'll now briefly cover the four main types of XSS attacks. The first one being stored XSS. This is one of the more basic types of attacks where an injected script is stored on the target server and ran every time the page is loaded. Another type of XSS attack is blind XSS. This is similar to stored in the fact that the injected payload is stored on the target servers. However, it is not immediately accessed when the page is ran and is usually hidden somewhere, hence the term blind. Instead, the payload is stored where it could be accessed later. This is usually by an administrator. DOM XSS is a little more complicated, and it injects payloads into the domain object model. I will go into this a little more in depth later when I show some real examples of DOM XSS, but fundamentally the DOM is often utilized by developers, and it is sometimes possible to inject payloads into the DOM through the HTML. For example, through window.location, which grabs the current URL address and redirects to a new page. Like I say, don't worry if you don't quite get this one yet, I'll try to make more sense of it later on. The fourth type of attack is a reflected attack. This is where the payload is not stored on the server, but instead just reflected on the website. So an example of this could be after you log onto a website, you may be greeted by a message such as hello and your name. In a reflected attack, you could replace the name with a payload. The final type of attack, self-XSS, involves someone going directly into a developer console and running an XSS payload. Whilst in theory this is still an XSS attack, it requires someone to already have access to a developer console, and therefore is more of a social engineering attack in trying to convince someone with access to the console to run the payload. Okay, so we'll move on to some actual examples of cross-site scripting and how that might actually look when you perform a cross-site scripting attack. So for this, I'm going to be using Portswigger, which is a brilliant website where you can test out, your cross-site scripting skills, lots of different types of attacks. It's just a really, really useful website to be able to use. And alongside that, I'm also going to be using Burp Suite, which is, again, another brilliant tool for lots of different reasons, but this really helps us sort of visualize and understand what's going to be happening when we're doing these attacks, and I'll try my best to walk you through it. So when you launch Burp Suite, it'll look something like this. Here's the dashboard. You know, there's a lot of different tools up here. We're only really going to be focusing on the target one at the top and the repeater for now. So you'll move on to target and it won't look like this straight away. It'll ask you to open a browser, which is just this. And then I've logged on to Portswigger. But when you log on, you'll start to notice on the left hand side here, all the websites that you've visited will pop up. So as you can see, there's Portswigger down here. But when I go into this lab now, you'll notice within Burp Suite, in just a moment, there we go. So at the top, we've got this new web address. And as you can see, it matches the one with this exercise on. So this might look quite confusing to you, which is understandable. But basically all we've got here are the request and responses to the website. So the request is what our client sends to the website, and the response is just the information we get back. So when we look at cross-site scripting, we have to look at what's available to us. Where could we inject our own payloads? So it's always a good idea to just sort of look through the website, see where you can type things in or post messages. That's always a good start. So as you can see, there's a search bar here. So if I were to type hello world and search that, as you can see in Burp Suite, this has popped up, which is the new request and response for what I've just sent. So the request, search hello world, and this is the response we've got. So if I just drag this up and search hello world, you can see here under header 1, there are no search results for hello world. Obviously there's no blogs on here about hello world. But we now know that what we're typing is being saved on the website. So we can try to exploit this by maybe typing in a script and seeing if that will work. So what I'm going to do here is send this request to the repeater. So again, this is just another request and response, the same as before. But what I'm going to try to do is remove that search term and replace it with a script. So in this case, that opens up the JavaScript bracket. We'll type alert1, which would just send an alert with the number 1. That's a really basic way of seeing whether there is a vulnerability in terms of XSS, because it just shows an alert. And we'll close the script. Right, so we'll send this request. And here's the response. So if we look down again in this search bar, I'll just type, oh sorry, not hello world, alert, because that was what we were doing. So down here again in the header, there are no search results for alert 1, obviously. However, this is now in pink. It's recognized this as a script. So if I copy this URL, take it back into here and paste, you'll notice there's the alert. So we've now successfully managed to make the website do something it's not supposed to do. It's not supposed to send an alert. We've successfully sent our payload in and it's given us this as a response. So we've had a look at some reflected XSS in which we have inputted the script into the search bar and it has reflected back to us that script and caused an alert. So you might be wondering, well, what else can we do? An alert isn't going to get us anywhere in terms of hacking using XSS. And so we're now going to move on to stored XSS, which can be a little bit more dangerous if utilized correctly. So we've got a website very similar to before in the test environment on Portswigger. And this time there's no search bar. So if we go down, again, the most important part is having a look around the website, seeing where you might be able to input some of your own script. So let's go into this blog. And if we scroll down, we can see there's comments. Now, the difference between a search bar and comments is that a comment will stay on the website. It will be stored on the website. So let's have a go at doing something similar to before. This time I'm not doing it through Burp Suite. I'm just going to do it straight onto the website because I'm actually going to use a different tool to demonstrate what more we can do than show an alert. So if I open with script again and create an alert and close the script. Type my name, Adam, and fake email 123@mail.com. And I don't think we need a website. So if I post this comment and go back to the blog, you can see we get another alert. However, if we go back to the home page, every time this page is now visited, because it has been stored, we'll see we get the alert over and over and over again. Okay, so we now understand the basics of stored XSS and reflected, in the fact that stored is stored on the web page somewhere and reflected is just reflected back to us. However, so far we've only ever set an alert to go off on the website, which isn't very impressive in terms of hacking. So to demonstrate this a bit further, I'm going to be using a tool called Beef, which stands for Browser Exploitation Framework, which essentially, as the name sounds, allows us to exploit lots of different things when we can get a JavaScript payload into the website. So we'll do this by launching Beef, which is available on a lot of Linux machines. And it takes a while to launch, but when it does, it'll give us a user interface so we can sort of interact with everything and have a browse of what different exploits are available on the web page. So as you can see down at the bottom of the terminal here, it's opening the web UI and it gives us a link. So if I copy this link and just bring it into the web browser, it will take us to the Beef login page. So when you first install Beef, it will prompt you to set a username and password, which I already have done. So I will log in and it will take us to sort of the home page of Beef. So the really important part here is if you scroll back up, you can see a hook. Now this hook is a script in itself and includes a JavaScript file called hook.js. Now this essentially hooks the website to Beef, allowing you to perform lots of different exploitations. So in this case, I am actually just going to take the example script as this matches the IP I'm using on the virtual machine. So if I copy this and go back here, and again, I'll just choose one of the blogs to post on. Let's go Perseverance. Right at the bottom, if I post this in, and I go Adam, and I set an email and post this script, it's going to hook this web page to Beef, and then we'll sort of see what we're able to do. So let's go back to the blog. So as you can see, it's been posted down here. You can't actually see it because it isn't normal text, it's a script. But the big part is if we go back to the Beef control panel, we can see under online browsers, there is now this, which matches the web address of the web page we're targeting. So there's lots of information here about the browsers and the web page, but the really important part is under the command section. So now these two are hooked, the web page is running the hook.js, we can choose lots of different exploits to run on this web page. So for example, if I were to go under browser and let's select play sound. So now when we execute this and go back onto here, nothing will happen because audio is blocked. Let's try again. It plays the sound, but it can get a lot worse than that. So if we have a look further down this tree, we'll see social engineering, for example. And let's launch a Google phishing attack. So if we execute this, anyone that's on this web page, as the comment is already stored here, will experience this. Now, to some, this may seem like a legitimate Google Mail login page, but if I type in an email, and let's go for an example, password 12345, sign in, everything seems sort of normal, nothing seems to have happened. But when we go back to the Beef control panel and select on the first ID that's come up here, you can see under the results, we've got fake mail at mail.com and password 12345. So now you can see the sort of dangers of cross-site scripting, and if your website is vulnerable, how it could be affected and what could happen. Okay, so we're now going to have a look at DOM XSS. And if you remember earlier in the video, I suggested that this was a little bit trickier than the other methods. But that's because it involves manipulating the DOM to be able to execute our payloads. So we've got another test environment here. This time the search bar's back. So let's try what we tried before and just sending an alert via a script. As you can see, we didn't get an alert, it's not worked. So we need to dig a little bit deeper into the DOM to try and figure out what's going on. So for the sake of testing, we will go for test 12345. Okay, so if we now inspect this, this is now the DOM browser. This is where everything happens sort of behind the scenes. And we can see that there is a result here for test 12345. And there's one down here within an image where the search terms are test 12345. So we look at this and we can see as well there is a script here, meaning that JavaScript is influencing the DOM. So let's open this up quickly. And we can see here there's something called document.write. Now this basically writes to the web page, and it's coming from an image which includes the query of our search terms. That's interesting. We've already seen this, and it's down here. So our search terms are actually being trapped inside of an image. So it is possible to use JavaScript to manipulate the DOM environment to be able to execute our payloads. So when we see this, we want to think, well, how can we break out of an image? Because an image won't run a payload. So if we go back up to here, we can actually close it off. And then we can do svg onload. Now what this is going to do is basically say, now we've broken out of the image, on the load of the image, we can do something else. So on the load of this image, which are our search results, we can play an alert. So now we've broken out of the image, hopefully this should play an alert. And this is how we can use JavaScript to manipulate the DOM environment. And as you can see, we get the alert, and this is a good example of DOM XSS. So we've now seen examples of reflected, stored, and DOM XSS. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to show you any self or blind XSS, as these both rely on third parties, which is unfortunately not something I have access to. But as we round off this video, I thought it would be responsible to show you how websites prevent cross-site scripting. So one way of preventing against cross-site scripting is through filtering inputs. So when the user input is required, filter as strictly as possible based on what is expected for valid output. So for example, if there is a box where a user is required to input their name, you wouldn't be expecting any special characters such as speech marks or open and close brackets, or maybe even the word script. So these are all words that you could filter out from being accepted. And so the other main way of preventing against cross-site scripting is by encoding data on output. So when user-controlled data is output in HTTP, encode the output to prevent it as being interpreted as active content. So what this is essentially doing is making sure that whenever a user inputs something, what is outputted cannot be made active content such as a script. And when a framework is not being used, an output encoding library should be. This is because a lot of frameworks when creating websites already have a lot of preventative measures against cross-site scripting, but where one is not used, an encoding library should be. And so that rounds off my video on cross-site scripting. I hope that you've learned something or found this video useful. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know, or if you have any tips, that would be very appreciated. Thanks for watching.